The storm unleashed its fury over whispering pines, drenching the ancient trees and turning the earth to mud. Thunder crashed through the mountains as lightning split the darkened sky. Nestled among the towering trees stood a small wooden cabin, its chimney releasing wisps of smoke that quickly vanished in the downpour. Inside, Mason tended a modest fire, carefully adding twigs to keep the flames alive. At 40, his hands showed years of outdoor life, weathered and strong. His beard was peppered with silver, and his flannel shirt had seen better days. Once a forestry expert, Mason had retreated from the world 5 years ago, choosing solitude over society. His eyes, though kind, carried a shadow of past pain. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. A scream pierced through the storm's howl. Mason froze, listening intently. Another cry followed, clearly a woman in distress. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rain jacket and rushed outside. The rain assaulted him immediately, but he pressed forward, scanning the forest until he spotted her near a rocky ledge. She sat in mud, clutching her knee, which was bleeding through her torn designer hiking pants. Her dark hair clung to her face, and everything about her, from her expensive rain jacket to her high-end boots, screamed city dweller. "Stay back," she shouted when she saw him approaching. Mason halted, raising his hands. "You're hurt. I can help." I said, "Stay away." Her voice trembled with fear and pain. "You can't walk on that knee, and this storm's getting worse. I have a cabin nearby, warm, dry, first aid kit." Mason kept his distance, respecting her wariness. "Stay here, and hypothermia becomes a real possibility." She hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. A powerful gust of wind made the decision for her as she lost balance and cried out again. Mason approached cautiously and lifted her. "My cabin's not far. Put me down," she demanded, hitting his shoulder. "I'll scream." "You already are," he replied calmly, focused on navigating the treacherous path. After a grueling trek, they reached the cabin. Mason gently placed her on a blanket near the fire. She immediately pushed herself away, eyes filled with distrust. "Who are you? Why should I trust you?" she demanded. Mason stood back, water dripping from his clothes. "If I meant you harm, I wouldn't have struggled through mud and rain to bring you here." She checked her phone. No signal. Tears welled in her eyes. "How far are we from civilization?" Mason didn't answer. Instead, he knelt and opened a first aid kit. "Let me look at your knee." "Don't touch me," she snapped. "Fine." He set the kit beside her and moved away. The fire crackled between them. Outside, rain continued to pound the roof. "I'm sorry," she eventually said. "I'm just scared." Mason ladled soup from the pot hanging over the fire and offered it to her in a metal bowl. She accepted it with trembling hands, seemingly surprised by its warmth and flavor. "Thank you," she murmured. Mason nodded, sitting across the room as he dried his jacket. "What's your name?" she finally asked. "Mason. I'm Olivia." She sipped more soup. "I didn't mean to get lost. I just needed to escape. Everything." Mason nodded slowly. "You found a right place for that." With those words, the space between them began to shift, not disappearing completely, but no longer filled with fear and suspicion. As the storm raged outside, two strangers began a tentative connection neither could have anticipated. Morning arrived with gentle sunlight filtering through the trees. The storm had passed, leaving behind a glistening forest dripping with rainwater. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered from the night's fire. Olivia woke under a wool blanket, momentarily confused by her surroundings. Reality rushed back quickly. The storm, her injury, the stranger who'd rescued her. She sat up, wincing as her injured knee protested. Mason stood by the window, sipping coffee from a tin mug. He glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the forest. "You live out here alone?" Olivia asked. "Yes." "Why?" The question was gentle, curious rather than judgmental. Mason didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was measured. "Most people don't have a reason to disappear into the woods." Olivia sensed she shouldn't press further. "Well, thank you for last night. For everything." Mason nodded and returned to tending the fire. Olivia reached for her jacket and pulled out her wallet, looking for ID or anything that might help once she returned to town. As she searched, the wallet slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents. Mason bent to help, picking up the wallet. As he was about to return it, his eyes fixed on something inside, a business card with gold lettering. He read aloud, Olivia Reynolds. The atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. Mason's posture stiffened, his expression hardening. Reynolds, he repeated, dropping the wallet as if burned. Reynolds Enterprises. Olivia frowned, confused by his reaction. Yes, that's me. Do you know my family? Mason's laugh was cold and bitter. Your father is Thomas Reynolds? She nodded cautiously. Yes. Do you know him? I know what he's done. Mason's voice turned harsh. Your father's company is the reason my family lost everything. Olivia stared at him, baffled. What are you talking about? 7 years ago, Mason explained, pacing now, Reynolds Enterprises bought these lands, claimed it was for sustainable development. They forced out families who'd lived here for generations. My parents built our home with their own hands. We were evicted like trespassers. He stopped, emotion cracking through his controlled exterior. My father died of a heart attack 6 months later. The stress, the loss, it broke him. My mother never recovered either. She passed away last year, still heartbroken over losing the only home she ever loved. Olivia sat stunned. I didn't know. Of course not, Mason snapped. You were probably too busy enjoying your privileged life to notice the families your father destroyed. That's unfair, Olivia countered, rising despite her pain. I was in college when that happened. I didn't run the company. No, but you benefit from it, Mason retorted. The luxury cars, the penthouses, all built on the backs of families like mine. You don't know me, Olivia's voice rose. Don't act like you do. I know enough, Mason replied. You're just another rich kid playing wilderness explorer, thinking a little dirt and discomfort make for an exciting story to tell at cocktail parties. Color flooded Olivia's cheeks. You think I came out here for fun? You think I enjoy getting lost, falling off cliffs, sleeping on the floor of a stranger's cabin? Mason's eyes flashed. I don't hate you. I hate what you represent. That broke something in Olivia. She stepped forward, ignoring the pain in her knee. You think you have a monopoly on suffering? I lost my mother to cancer when I was 8. My father buried himself in work and forgot he had a daughter. I've spent my life alone in mansions full of staff but empty of love. So don't lecture me about privilege when you know nothing about my life. Mason stood silent, jaw clenched. You want to hate my father? Fine, Olivia continued. But don't blame me for decisions I had no part in. Mason looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes, but instead of softening, his expression hardened again. You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything. Without warning, Olivia slapped him. The sound cracked through the cabin like lightning. They stood frozen, both surprised by her action. I thought you were different, she whispered, tears threatening. But you're just like everyone else, so caught up in your pain that you can't see beyond it. She turned away, limping toward the cot in the corner, pulling the blanket around herself like armor. Mason remained motionless, breathing heavily, looking at the wallet still on the floor. The name, Reynolds, was a painful reminder of everything he'd lost. Outside, birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the storm brewing inside the cabin. The rain returned that afternoon, gentler now but persistent, wrapping the forest in a soft gray mist. Inside the cabin, Mason and Olivia maintained their distance, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Mason sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood, his back to Olivia. She lay curled on the cot, blanket pulled tight, having refused the food he'd left her. A small sound caught Mason's attention. A whimper, so quiet he almost missed it. He turned and saw Olivia trembling. Her face was flushed, her breathing shallow. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead despite the cabin's cool air. Olivia, he called cautiously. When she didn't respond, he moved closer and touched her shoulder. Her skin burned with fever. Olivia, he called again, louder now. She murmured something incoherent, then whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I never wanted to be like him. Mason froze, suddenly seeing beyond the name Reynolds to the woman suffering before him. He grabbed a cloth, soaked it in cool water, and placed it gently on her forehead. As he adjusted the blanket, she stirred restlessly. I just wanted him to see me, she mumbled through the fever. Just once. Mason sat back, watching this woman, whom he'd judged so harshly, revealing vulnerability he never expected. The daughter of Thomas Reynolds wasn't simply an heiress. She was someone carrying her own deep wounds. When morning came, Olivia's fever had broken. She opened her eyes to find Mason nearby, watching her with concern. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Almost a day." He handed her water. The fever hit hard. She drank gratefully, then noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" Mason hesitated. "You said some things while you were feverish." Olivia went still. "Did I? You said you didn't want to become like your father." She looked away, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "It's true," she finally said. "People assume being Thomas Reynolds' daughter means I've lived some perfect, charmed life. But none of that matters when the person you need most doesn't know how to love you." Mason remained silent, allowing her to continue. "After my mother died, my father couldn't cope with raising a daughter on his own. I was handed off to nannies, boarding schools, summer camps, anywhere but home. I've spent my life trying to earn his attention." Her voice cracked. "But I'm just another asset in his empire." She met Mason's eyes. "I came here because I needed to remember who I was before I became someone I couldn't recognize anymore." Mason swallowed hard. "My mother loved this forest," he said quietly. "We'd hike together every spring, planting wildflowers along trails. After your father's company took over, something in her broke. She fought the eviction, organized protests, but they crushed her spirit." His voice dropped lower. "The night she died, our new apartment was freezing. We couldn't afford proper heating. She sat by the window, wrapped in blankets, staring into the night. Her last words were, 'I can still smell the pines.'" "I'm so sorry," Olivia whispered. Mason nodded. "I blamed your father for years. And when I saw your name, I blamed you too." A silence fell between them, no longer angry, but filled with the raw truth of shared pain. Outside, rain continued to fall softly. Inside, something fundamental had changed. That night, it didn't speak again. Mason slept on the floor, Olivia on the cot. Though their backs were to each other, the space between them had transformed. No longer strangers or enemies, just two wounded souls learning that healing sometimes begins with understanding another's pain. The next morning brought misty sunshine. The rain had eased to occasional drizzle, and Mason suggested they try to reach town. "Should be about 3 miles west," he said, securing his backpack. "Storm might have damaged parts of the trail, but we'll manage." Olivia nodded, following him with a slight limp. Her knee was improving, but still tender. They walked in companionable silence, the forest alive around them with birdsong and dripping leaves. After a while, Olivia glanced at Mason. "If someone had told me last week I'd be hiking with a man who once couldn't stand me, I wouldn't have believed them." Mason's lips curved slightly. "I never said I couldn't stand you. You didn't have to." They continued through the woods until Olivia stepped on a patch of slick moss. Her foot slipped, and before Mason could grab her, she tumbled down a slope. "Mason!" she cried out. He rushed to the edge and saw her below, about 12 feet down, lying in a narrow, rocky crevice, clutching her ankle. "Are you okay?" he called. "I think I twisted my ankle. I can't climb out." Mason assessed the situation. The sides were too steep for a safe climb, too slick for a rope to hold. With no other option, he carefully lowered himself into the gap, maneuvering down until he reached her side. The crevice was cramped and damp, barely wide enough for them to sit side by side. Water trickled down the stone walls, and cold settled around them quickly. Mason examined her ankle. Not broken, just badly twisted. "We'll wrap it properly once we're out." "If we get out," Olivia whispered. "We will," Mason assured her, though he knew rescue might take hours. As the cold deepened, Olivia began to shake, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Hey," Mason said gently. "You're all right." "I hate small spaces," she gasped. "I feel trapped." He reached for her hand. "You're not alone. I'm right here." She closed her eyes, struggling to calm her breathing. "When I was young," Mason said softly, "my mother would take me to a special clearing near our home. We'd lie on our backs and look up through the trees. She said the sunlight filtering through the branches looked like nature's own stained glass." Olivia's trembling subsided slightly as she focused on his words. She'd hum a melody she created. He continued. "I never forgot it. It sounded like peace itself." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, sharing his warmth. She leaned into him, her body relaxing. "No one's ever held me like this," she admitted quietly. "Not with stories, not with comfort." Mason looked at her, seeing the tears forming in her eyes. "You treat me like a real person," she whispered. "Not a title or a burden." He squeezed her hand. "Because that's what you are. She cried softly against his shoulder, and he held her, neither turning away from the moment of genuine connection. Eventually, Mason reached into his pack and pulled out an emergency flare. He lit it, and bright orange smoke spiraled upward through the narrow opening above them, casting a warm glow on the stone walls. It wasn't long before voices called through the trees. "Down here!" Mason shouted. "We're down here!" Rescue workers appeared at the top of the crevice. With ropes and a basket, they pulled Olivia out first, then Mason. Paramedics checked her ankle and offered transport back to town. Mason brushed dirt from his clothes as Olivia stood nearby, watching him. "They can take you now," he said. "You'll be fine." She didn't move. "I don't want to go yet." Mason looked at her, surprised. "If I leave now," she explained softly, "I think I'll lose something I didn't even know I needed." He didn't reply, but his eyes softened. Around them, the forest held the scent of rain and earth, and between them, something unspoken had taken root, fragile, real, and full of possibility. The city was a jarring contrast to whispering pines, loud, bright, suffocating in its constant motion. When Olivia stepped off the private medical helicopter onto the roof of Metro General Hospital, cameras were already flashing. News had traveled fast. Reynolds' heiress rescued after wilderness ordeal. For once, Olivia didn't care about the headlines. Her thoughts remained in the forest, with a crackling fire and the man who had saved her in more ways than one. Doctors examined her thoroughly, treating her ankle and the lingering effects of her fever. She answered their questions mechanically, her mind elsewhere. 3 days later, Thomas Reynolds returned from an overseas business trip. Immaculately dressed, as always, not a silver hair out of place, he strode into Olivia's penthouse with his usual commanding presence. Something shifted in his expression when he saw her sitting quietly by the window, a vulnerability in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. "Olivia," he said, his voice controlled but concerned. "You worried everyone." She looked up. "I worried myself, too." He sat across from her. "I read the reports. You were lost, injured. Someone found you." She nodded. "His name is Mason." Reynolds frowned slightly. "And who is Mason?" "A man who lives in the forest," she replied. "A man who helped me when no one else could." There was a pause. Reynolds didn't like unknowns or surprises. "Did he contact the media? Try to leverage this situation?" he asked. "No," Olivia said sharply. "He wants nothing to do with any of this. He saved me and then stepped back." Reynolds studied her carefully. "I'd like to thank him properly." "You mean investigate him?" Olivia countered. He didn't respond, but the flicker in his eyes confirmed her suspicion. Later that evening, when Olivia called Mason from her terrace, her voice was hopeful. "You should visit just for a few days. I could show you the city. Real food, real coffee, something not cooked over an open flame." Mason chuckled. "And traffic and noise and concrete everywhere. Sound like paradise." "Please," she said softly, "just to see me." Mason went quiet. "I don't belong there." "Olivia," he finally said. "That world is yours, not mine." She didn't argue, but her silence spoke volumes. The next morning, Thomas Reynolds reviewed a file in his limousine. Name, Mason Everett. Age, 40. Former resident of Whispering Pines. Filed a lawsuit against Reynolds Enterprises 7 years ago, contesting land acquisition. Case dismissed. Mother Eleanor Everett, deceased. Father James Everett, deceased. Currently living off-grid. No formal employment. Reynolds closed the folder. "Arrange a meeting," he told his assistant. "Private. Just him and me." Mason arrived 4 days later at Reynolds' request, entering a quiet conference room at the top of the corporate headquarters. Thomas Reynolds stood by the window, watching the city below. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning. "I came because your daughter asked me to," Mason replied. Reynolds smiled thinly. "She's grown attached to you." "Understandable. Life-threatening situations create unusual bonds." Mason remained silent. Reynolds turned, his gaze sharp. "You're not just a man from the woods, Mr. Everett. You're the same man who sued my company 7 years ago over the Whispering Pines development." Mason's jaw tightened, but he stayed composed. "I remember your mother," Reynolds continued. "She caused quite a disturbance, but the courts sided with us." "Yes, we lost," Mason said evenly. "But not before I watched my parents die, broken by your company's actions." Reynolds ignored the accusation. "I understand your pain, but I cannot allow the past to compromise my daughter's future." Mason narrowed his eyes. "Is that a threat?" It's a negotiation, Reynolds said calmly. Walk away from Olivia, and I will ensure your name remains untarnished. I won't expose your history, your failed lawsuit, or your grudge. But if you continue this relationship, I will paint you as an opportunist who manipulated a vulnerable woman for attention or compensation. Mason stared in disbelief. She's not property to be traded in a business deal. She's my daughter, Reynolds said, voice cold. And you are a relic of a world we legally removed years ago. Mason didn't respond. He turned and walked out without another word. But his silence was a statement in itself. The line had been drawn, and somewhere in that city of glass and steel, a battle for more than love had just begun. Autumn was painting whispering pines in amber and gold. Crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and birds gathered, preparing for migration. Mason was repairing his cabin roof when he heard rapid footsteps approaching. He turned and saw Olivia standing at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard from the hike, her eyes fixed on him with determination. He froze. She moved forward. You didn't answer any of my calls, she said. Mason returned to his work. I thought that was clear enough. She came closer. I needed to see you. You shouldn't have come here, he said evenly. Not after what your father said. I don't care what he said, she replied. I don't care about his money or his threats. I care about you. Mason finally looked at her properly, saw the resolve in her eyes, the tension in her posture, the trembling in her hands. I'm not part of your world, Olivia, he said quietly, and you don't belong in mine. You don't get to decide that, she countered, her voice breaking. You don't get to walk away from this like it meant nothing. He climbed down from the ladder, setting his tools aside. It didn't mean anything. It meant too much. That's why I'm letting it go. She stared at him in disbelief. You're not letting it go. You're running. Mason looked down at his hands. If I stay, I'll always be the man who sued your family, the enemy of your father, the scandal in the press. I'll never stop fighting this. And I won't be the reason you lose everything. I don't want his everything, she said, tears rising. I want my own life, one that feels real. And I only ever felt that here, with you. When he remained silent, Olivia exhaled shakily. She reached into her coat, removed a folded paper, and extended it to him. Then at least read this when I'm gone. He hesitated, but accepted the letter. She looked at him one last time, eyes brimming with pain. You think pushing me away protects me, but it's not protection. It's punishment for both of us. With that, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Mason stood in the clearing long after she had gone. That night, as wind rustled the leaves outside his cabin, he finally opened her letter. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged where tears had fallen. Dear Mason, I grew up in a house with marble floors and soaring ceilings, surrounded by beauty that felt cold and empty. My father filled our home with wealth, but never with warmth. I would have traded every diamond, every vacation, every designer dress for one moment where he truly saw me as his daughter, not his heir. I used to cry myself to sleep in rooms larger than your entire cabin. But in that small space among the pines, with the fire crackling and the storm roaring outside, I didn't cry. I felt safe. I felt seen. You think you're not enough for me, but the truth is, you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I was enough for myself. If I never see you again, please remember this. You saved me, not just from the wilderness, but from the life that was slowly suffocating me. Yours always, Olivia. Mason's eyes burned as he lowered the letter. Every word echoed through the walls he had built around his heart. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, a single tear traced his cheek. The call came just after midnight. Olivia's hands shook as she clutched her phone, her voice caught between disbelief and terror. There was a landslide, the voice explained. Your father was inspecting the New Ridge development site. We lost contact hours ago. GPS last showed him in Sector 7, dense forest, steep terrain, completely undeveloped. Olivia's mind raced. That area was just miles from Whispering Pines. There's only one person who knows that landscape well enough to find him, she whispered. Hours later, Mason opened his cabin door at first light to find Olivia standing there, mud on her boots, panic in her eyes. He's missing, she said breathlessly. My father is lost in the forest. They can't reach him. Mason's face remained unreadable. I know what he said, what he did, but please, Mason, you're the only one who knows that forest well enough to find him before it's too late. Without a word, Mason grabbed his pack and stepped past her into the morning mist. The search was swift and methodical. Mason moved through the wilderness instinctively, reading the land like an open book. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous: fallen trees, loose rock, washed-out paths. After 3 hours, near a steep ravine, Mason spotted something: a torn piece of expensive fabric caught on a branch. Not far away, he found Thomas Reynolds unconscious against a fallen tree, one leg badly broken, his face pale and bloodied. Mason checked for vital signs, then quickly opened his pack. He worked efficiently, stabilizing the broken leg with makeshift splints, cleaning and bandaging the head wound. Reynolds stirred, groaning in confusion. "Oh, it's Mason," he replied simply. When recognition dawned, Reynolds' face twisted, not with hostility, but with something like shame. "I thought I was going to die out here," he murmured. "You still might," Mason said, tying the last bandage, "unless you hold still and let me help you." Reynolds didn't argue. His strength was gone. He allowed Mason to half-carry him as they began the slow journey back to safety. The trek took nearly 5 hours. By the time they reached the ranger station, search parties had been mobilized, and Olivia was there, pacing anxiously outside. She ran to them the moment they appeared, embracing Mason before kneeling beside her father. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, gripping Reynolds' hand. Reynolds looked from his daughter to Mason. There was no arrogance now, only exhaustion and something unfamiliar: humility. That evening, while medical personnel treated Reynolds inside the outpost and Olivia spoke with the officials, Mason stood outside watching the sunset paint the treetops golden. The door opened behind him. Reynolds emerged, leaning heavily on a crutch, his head bandaged. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. Mason didn't turn. "You owe it to your daughter. She's why I came." Reynolds nodded slowly. "You could have left me out there. Many would say I deserved it." Mason finally faced him. "I didn't save you because you deserved it. I did it because Olivia deserves a father worth loving." Reynolds looked away, jaw tight. Then his voice broke. "I never knew how to be that. I thought providing wealth, security, and opportunity would be enough. It's not," Mason said simply. Reynolds' eyes filled unexpectedly. He turned away quickly, wiping them, but the tears had already fallen. Mason didn't speak further. He stepped away, leaving Reynolds alone with his thoughts, with the weight of every choice he had made. But healing, like the forest, often begins in the quietest places. And sometimes redemption must be earned through actions, not words. 1 year later, Whispering Pines flourished with new life. Wildflowers pushed through the forest floor, and sunlight dappled the moss-covered ground. In a clearing stood a new building, the Whispering Pines Healing Center. Simple yet beautiful, it was designed to complement the forest, not dominate it. A wide porch wrapped around the structure, and above the entrance hung a hand-carved sign, "Where broken spirits find their way home." Today, a gathering had assembled. Veterans, children from foster care, elderly community members, volunteers, and people whose lives had once unraveled but were now being carefully rewoven. Mason stood quietly near the entrance, wearing a clean button-down shirt, his beard neatly trimmed. Beside him, Olivia looked radiant in forest green, clutching note cards with slightly trembling fingers. She stepped forward to address the crowd. "This center wasn't created out of charity," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It was born from necessity, the need to heal, to remember, to begin again." She glanced at Mason, who nodded encouragingly. "I lost myself once in these woods," she continued, "and I found something greater than survival. I found truth. I found love. And I found the courage to build a life that matters. Not one I inherited, but one I chose." Warm applause followed. The forest seemed to breathe with them, accepting their presence. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a black SUV arrived. Heads turned as Thomas Reynolds stepped out. He moved more slowly now, his posture less rigid with pride. Time and reflection had changed him in ways money never could. He walked alone toward Mason as everyone watched. Mason faced him calmly. Reynolds spoke quietly. "We spend lifetimes running from our mistakes, but sometimes all it takes is one moment to stop, turn around, and say what matters." Mason waited. "You once said I didn't deserve saving," Reynolds continued. "You were right. But Olivia deserved a father who could say thank you. So thank you for saving me, and for loving her in ways I never learned how." He extended his hand. Mason hesitated, then reached out and shook it firmly. The crowd responded with gentle applause. Olivia wiped away a tear, her heart too full for words. That evening, the forest glowed with campfires and laughter. Music drifted between the trees, and conversations flowed easily. Mason led Olivia down a quiet path lit by lanterns. Beneath the stars, he took her hands in his. "I don't have much," he said softly. "No fortune, no empire, just this heart and that old cabin where everything began." He held out a ring, wood and silver, simple, imperfect, beautiful. Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "This is all I've ever wanted." When he slipped the ring on her finger, the forest seemed to sigh in approval. Behind them, friends applauded softly, joy spreading through the night like starlight. By morning, the Whispering Pines Healing Center was alive with activity. Children played beneath the trees. Elders shared stories on the porch. Veterans found quiet corners of peace. Mason and Olivia stood together at the railing, hands intertwined. Behind them, Thomas Reynolds sat with a cup of tea, watching not as a CEO, but as a father who had finally found his way home. Mason looked at Olivia with a smile. Some people search a lifetime for home. She rested her head on his shoulder. And some hearts just need one storm to remember how to love again. They remained side by side in a place born from pain and now thriving with hope. And so, in the heart of Whispering Pines, where wounds once echoed through the trees, healing found its voice, teaching us that sometimes the deepest hurts bring forth the most beautiful beginnings. Because love isn't always announced with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers in the rustle of leaves, in the warmth of a cabin fire, or in the simple act of staying when it would be easier to walk away.